Hello, good evening everybody. Thank you very much for coming along this evening to ResPublica's Fringe event on social value and innovation in public services. I'm Julian. I'm a senior researcher and project manager at the think tank ResPublica, and I am delighted to host this panel here this evening. If you're tweeting this evening, please use the hashtag #RPFringe. Following all of these Fringe events, we will be publishing our Fringe magazine on our website, to which myself, Bonnie from NAVCA, and Chris White, he has very kindly contributed. So I do encourage you to go on our website and access those on there. So if I really quickly introduce our panellists here today, to my furthest left we have Joe Irvin, the Chief Executive of NAVCA, the National Association for Voluntary and Community Action. Then I have Chris White MP to my left here, who raised the Public Services Social Value Bill earlier this year, last year rather, and it became an act earlier this year. To my farthest right I have Barry Hughes, Chief Executive of Selwood Housing, and to my closest right, Nick Hurd MP, the Minister of State for Civil Society. Welcome very much to you all. So we obviously saw Chris's act achieve royal assent earlier this year and will be implemented in January 2013. In essence, it calls all public bodies in England and Wales to consider how the services they commission and procure might improve the economic, social and environmental well-being of the local area. So we are now asking the questions, what next? How is this going to happen? And what is the kind of general context of this? How do we drive social economy through procurement, commissioning and other measures? So if I can turn first of all to Chris White MP to make a few remarks.
Thank you very much, Karen. If I can start off, firstly thank you to the Minister who was going to go first, but very kindly passed the baton over to myself. But I'd also like to say hello to Philip in the audience. I was speaking to a colleague earlier today who said they had only joined the Conservative Party because of you. So that was a very interesting statement for a start.
But if you need to go to
I noticed some of you in the audience who were very kindly in the audience at 8 o'clock this morning, so we've had to do a slightly different speech for your sake, so thank you very much for coming along, sir. When I talk about the Social Value Act, I usually go into great depths and explanations about it, what it's for and what it's about, but this evening or this afternoon I just really wanted to put it in a bit further context. At the end of the day, an act is a piece of paper, and how are we going to make that piece of paper something that's going to happen? What we need to really achieve, and what I think we need to think about, is a cultural change. What makes us think differently about how we structure the provision of public goods, which in reality we've all absolutely taken for granted. Over the past few decades, I think we have seen public procurement as an issue which is entirely the domain of commissioners and civil servants. When we put out contracts out for tender, we ask bidders to come forward, pick up which one is the lowest price or nearest the lowest price, and then let the provider get on with it. It isn't a matter for politicians to get involved in. This is actually a matter for communities to get involved in. The state procures and we receive. In my view, this stifles innovation, because innovation can only really take place where there is an opportunity for free thinking and the implementation of some more novel and innovative ideas. In my view, if we're going to open up our public services to greater social value, then we need to change this traditional approach, and I think unfortunately it's going to be a little uncomfortable along the path. It's going to be uncomfortable because social value is far more political than financial value. Financial value has a simple benchmark, in general what is known as the price mechanism. That is why it's been left to officials and civil servants, because it is not what we consider a neutral space. Social value does have a single benchmark, and it shouldn't. It is constantly evolving and fits around peculiar circumstances and aspirations for our communities and the communities that we are procuring for. These are political discussions, and that means that politicians, particularly local politicians, need to grab this concept and run with this concept. How these aspirations and values actually affects the communities that they represent. I think the biggest barrier that faces reform of public services is the willingness of politicians to take the responsibility for the delivery and the design of the services which in effect our communities will use. What this Act has provided is a space and an opportunity for this cultural change to take place. It's removed the argument that social value cannot be done or cannot be achieved, and provides a duty for consideration. This will not get us further forward unless public bodies feel that they need to commission and procure services in the way that will only come through leadership from politicians at a local level. The next stage is getting politicians at all levels to understand the potential that exists in their communities and in using what is known as social enterprises. We need local councillors and council leaders to understand the potential in front of them. The social value approach has to deliver and can deliver better public services in the long run at a better cost. And if we can create this cultural change, we can create the momentum for innovation and give officials the feeling that they can experiment and they can take risks. I think we all realise that this is not going to take place overnight. This is why when the Act passed before the summer of this year, earlier this year, we're taking until January of next year to actually implement the Act. And in that time, guidelines and all the rest of it will be produced. But what we have to achieve in that space, in that timescale, is actually a greater understanding of the Act and how our local authorities, our local commissioners, and most importantly, I think, our local representatives can actually play their role in making something different and something that can be achieved. I think there is a bit of a fear of the unknown, that our local commissioners have always done things in such a way, but I think it's going to be the leadership of our local councillors, our local council leaders, that are going to be able to say there's something new and something different on the table. I've heard so many times that this approach is going to require much more energy. It's going to require people to do things that they're not comfortable with in terms of our commissioners. My view is that people are going to work of a day to do things better for their communities. And in effect, our commissioners are really nothing more than part of those communities themselves. The task is very much going to be for local councillors to grasp this challenge. And I think there's going to be no better grasp than the local elections in next May. And I look forward, for one, in that all our local councillors, from whatever party they represent, because at the end of the day, this Act only became an Act because of cross-party support. But our local councillors actually saying in their manifestos, we will work with our communities to understand that local care home, to understand that local community centre, to understand that local organisation that can do something different. It's going to be more difficult, it's going to be complex, it's going to be a challenge. But I think there will be a great deal of peer pressure, there will be a great deal of examples out there, a great deal of good practice that people can use on and feed on to make this Act an actual success. Thank you.
Can I pass straight over to Nick Hurd, please?
Thank you very much. I apologise, I'm speaking over some extraordinary sound effects behind me that cut in and out. I only assume it's the hot air being recycled from the Conservative Home marquee, which is behind us. But if I had to raise it up and down my voice, you'll understand why. Listen, I think politicians overuse phrases, and not least historic opportunity or once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You hear it all the time. It's very rarely true. I actually think in terms of what we're discussing, it happens to be true. I think we have a window of opportunity now to really find better ways of delivering public services and tackling some very, very, very stubborn social problems which carry an enormous cost, not just financial but human. And we have a window of opportunity to really shape the system and find better ways of tackling these problems. And it's now because, in the age of austerity, the fact that there is less money around, business as usual is not an option. And you're finding across the system that I work in that actually people, the penny is dropping. The business as usual is not an option, and you're seeing gradually silos coming down, people talking to each other from different agencies in ways they hadn't done before. You're looking at local authorities thinking of contracting out on a scale that they hadn't imagined. You're getting people in the public commissioning space rethinking their role and what they're providing and who they work with. There's an enormous, we're on the tip of really seismic change, I think, and I don't think we can underestimate that. But we have this window of opportunity, and we're determined to make the most of it in terms of really encouraging the system to embrace genuine social innovation, not play at it, just genuine social innovation. And I can't, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot underestimate how difficult and challenging this is, because you know, I sit in government. The risk aversion inside the system I operate in is unbelievable. Chronic aversion to risk taking, because of course there's no license to fail. But at the same time also, what I like to point out is we have an unbelievable tolerance of mediocrity. We never consider the cost of the status quo in terms of failure or unacceptable levels of service provision. We just keep buggering on. And this needs challenging, because actually the public now, I think, are increasingly saying, look, you know, for years we've heard politicians talk about the battle against drugs or getting people into work or keeping that agenda, and the numbers remain shockingly high. And actually we have to be quite honest in saying too much of what happened before, too much of what we just allowed to roll on and on is unacceptable. We have to change, we have to challenge ourselves, to innovate and work together to find better ways of tackling this problem, very much at the heart of the big society vision. Which is why my second point is, Chris has been very modest about his bill, and he's got it in the right perspective. It is a step on a journey, but it was an extremely useful contribution that came in at exactly the right time, which is why I was delighted to help him take it through Parliament, and it's my responsibility to make sure that we implement it properly, and you've had my commitment that we will. We're going to take a little bit of time over it because of my third point. The really important people inside this debate are this mysterious cadre of people called commissioners. There are thousands of them across the system. And my boss and I, Francis Maud, sat down in the cabinet and said, well, who are these people called commissioners? What's their status in the system? How much support do they receive? What training do they receive? What are their qualifications? Because they're important, because, ladies and gentlemen, through their fingers is invested £260 billion a year of our money. And some of them are very new to the job. GPs being the obvious example. But across the system, you've got people coming into the role of commissioner, and we don't know enough about who they are, what their background, or how they're supported locally. You talk to some of the people that represent what I would call very progressive commissioning, people out there who are really trying to do different things, and you talk about the environment in which they are working. It's horrendous. Queues of people at the door saying, oh, you can't do that. So these people, my point is this, these people called commissioners need help. They need help, and they need, and what we're trying to do is, various tools available to government. Yes, sometimes it needs a bit of a stick. Transparency is a very big stick. I consistently think one of the underestimated legacies of this administration is I think we have changed the game completely in terms of the information that is available to the public about what is being done in their name. And this is very, very important, because transparency is the friend of efficiency. And we are going to have so much more information about grants and contracts and stuff that is being done in our name, and crucially with it, through the Localism Bill, the right to challenge. This is an awkward, a difficult environment for commissioners. We're going to put them on their mettle to get things right. That's the stick. The support, we feel very strongly. Again, we ask what support is available for commissioners across the system, and as you might expect, you get the usual piecemeal stuff, departments doing different things to support commissioners inside their silo. And actually what Francis and I said, that doesn't seem the best way of doing this. Actually, Francis put it rather more bluntly than that. But and what we're doing, perhaps too tentatively, perhaps too slowly, but we're just getting on and doing it, we're setting up a commissioning academy inside the system, and we're inviting teams, critically teams, not just individuals, teams of people about to embark on a commissioning process to come into the academy, to go through a series of models on a learn and share model, so that we can help them become more effective in terms of what commissioning really is about, which is really understanding what is needed, because the system isn't good enough at doing that, and then shaping the market of supply, managing the market of supply, and then being really clear about the outcomes that you want to achieve, and where appropriate, paying for results rather than just handing out money with very little accountability for performance. This is, this academy has just started. The first cohort is going through it in the summer, just prototyping it, but it's something I think that you'll be hearing more about in the future. And why it's important is we need commissioners to understand what social value means. Because government always chucks out these phrases, and no one actually really explains to people actually on the front line who actually got the bloody difficult job of putting what this actually means in practice and why it might be a sensible thing to do rather than doing what perhaps comes naturally, which is to try and buy at the cheapest possible price. And what we need to do is to get more examples through the system of what really intelligent commissioning looks like when it considers social value. So the example I sometimes use, close to my home, is Hillingdon Council commissioned a company called Blue Sky to do the public landscaping. What's different about Blue Sky's strapline for this organisation is we're the only company in the country where you have to have a criminal record to work. They employ ex-offenders. They give them that critical chance to prove to a future employer that they can be trusted by giving them a regular, proper job to do with a uniform that goes with it and a responsibility. And it's fantastically effective. Hillingdon gets a great service, and the commissioner gets several bangs for our buck. That's smart commissioning as far as I'm concerned. That's smart procurement. But you need more examples through the system of actually, to open the commissioner's mind, think actually, how can we get more for the taxpayers' money that we're spending? And I think my basic point is they need more support, and we're trying to give them. My third and final point, social innovation, if we're serious about it, we need to give commissioners license and space to try different things. And that's very hard. What is going to make it easier is the growth of a market called social investment. This is money that is prepared to consider a blend of financial return and social impact. It's real, it's worth about £200 million at the moment. Independent forecasts suggest it could be worth about £1 billion by 2015. And of course our big play in this space was to create the world's first social investment institution, Big Society Capital. It's going to have £600 million on its balance sheet, and its mission is to grow this market. And the reason why this is important is that there are investors who are socially motivated, they're not driven by profit, but they're socially motivated, who want to help the cause of social innovation. And their message is to commissioners, we're prepared to help share the risk on new innovations. We're prepared to help fund the upfront costs of funding a charity or a social enterprise who wants to try something different on your body. We're prepared to fund the upfront costs of it, and we'll simply share in the success if it is a success. That's an enormously helpful message to a commissioner who's standing on the brink of saying, I really feel we need to try something different. It's that ability to share risk with someone else, to share success where success is generated. And this, I think, is an important new area. And the social impact bond, which some of you will have heard of, is an important mechanism for making this work. And that's why we're very keen to accelerate the development of social impact bonds to find out more about actually their ability to help commissioners really try and test new ways of doing things. And that's why we're announcing a new fund specifically to do that, called an Outcomes Fund, which we're committing at least £20 million to. So I think what I hope I'm trying to say is we're very, very serious about this space. Chris White's bill does not sit in isolation. It's part of a really dedicated effort to try and encourage more genuine social innovation across the commissioning landscape. Thank you very much.
So we've heard from government really, now we're going to hear from those who actually enact it and represent those who work out social value on the ground. Can I go first to Joe Irvin, who's Chief Executive of NAVCA?
Thanks very much. I'm very pleased to be here and behind the Conservative home, obviously sponsored by Dyson vacuum cleaners, stand behind us. And I'm very pleased to be sharing this platform, particularly with Nick Hurd, who's, I think as a minister, has taken the trouble to learn and understand about the voluntary and community sector, and I think that's why he's so well appreciated across the sector. And to Chris, who, you know, we've said it before, but to take a private member's bill through, you know, as a backbencher and bring that right through with the help of others, get cross-party support, but actually steer it through is an awfully hard job. So congratulations to Chris for getting that bill through Parliament. I just want to say, to cover three areas really. One is that we do have we do have a strong sense of community and a very strong social fabric in this country, and I think we should appreciate that. Sometimes we forget it, and we've got to we need to apply the power of that cohesive community and of that social force if we're going to tackle some of the problems of the future. Secondly, one or two specific points about implementing the Social Value Act, and then finally one last comment really about the wider context. So firstly, I think the Prime Minister said just before the closing ceremony of the Paralympic Games, which is so marvellous, I think, with the Olympic Games as well, wasn't it? And he said, you know, sometimes people talk down Britain, but just take a look at what we've achieved in the Olympics and the Paralympics and the volunteers there that have taken part. And I think that's true. And I think we as voluntary organisations and politicians have to sometimes be careful when we're trying to illustrate problems in society. We don't kind of go over to a kind of idea of despair. You know, it's too big to tackle. And I just, as a counterbalance to that, Vinder's here from Volunteering England, the chair of Volunteering England, and she can tell you, and it's in the almanac that's produced each year, that when people are asked, do you volunteer, a quarter of British adults say they volunteer on a monthly basis formally. A quarter. That's about 13 million people if you calculate that up. And that's a strong society. So it says two things to me, actually. One is that there are lots of problems out there that people want to tackle, and there are real problems, and I'm not underestimating those. But there are plenty of decent people out there who are willing to roll up their sleeves and try and help solve it, and not, you know, not at the being paid for it, but from using their own, volunteering their own time. So I think that's something we should be proud of, and something we should appreciate. And it's also a very varied patterns, very diverse sector. So there are 160,000 registered charities, which again is an illustration of all those people who got together and felt they needed to form a group to do something. Of the top 500 of those account for nearly 50% of all of the turnover, of all of the income of those charities. So there's 160,000 of the rest of them. You know, the average is less than 10,000. So half the organisations operate on less than 10,000 a year. And that's the group that we're particularly involved in, because we represent the local voluntary sector. And what I want to say is, if we're going to really get the most out of all of this, and of the value that this part of society can bring, this power in society can bring, we've got to pay attention to those smaller groups as well as to the very big groups. The second thing is about the Act itself, and I think Chris was right to say that just because it's become a law doesn't mean it's going to happen automatically. It's going to take an awful lot. It's going to take a culture change to make that happen. And Nick, I think, hit the nail on the head when talking about commissioners. So just 2 or 3 points that I would like to make. One is that I think commissioners, and I'm not saying this just to be critical of commissioners, as you say, you said so repeatedly they need help, as though they were kind of having drug problems really, but no, they need support as well as a critical eye. But many commissioners, and we come across this, and they really come from a culture of ordering bricks or simple practical things, and suddenly they're being asked to look at a whole different world really, which they've not been used to. And they're very cautious, and they've got lawyers looking over their shoulders advising them to be cautious. But sometimes the consequence of this is really quite a waste of money. And I'll give one example, is that there's a number of cases, often at lawyers' behest, commissioners, local authorities especially, might go through the whole European journal paraphernalia of advertising something which actually isn't a big enough contract to warrant that. And the cost of doing so is immense. Just the cost of the process can be immense. And I talked to the National Audit Office about this, and they say, yes, there are times when you should have payment by results contracts, there are times when you should advertise at European level, but make sure it's proportionate, because sometimes the paraphernalia around it doesn't warrant it. And sometimes a grant, not just given away freely, but with conditions, with targets, would be a better way to do it. So that's one thing, is just trying to get over some of the caution, over-cautious approach. Secondly, I think social value of the act itself. I think it's, to some people, it's quite daunting, really, because they think it's so big and so new, and there's so many other pressures that they really don't know how they're going to tackle this. And I think the way I look at this, and I don't know if you'd agree, it's not as though there's a ready reckoner out there which says, here, let's look down, and here for, involving so many volunteers, here's X number of pounds. Here's a prisoner who might not re-offend, that's worth X number of pounds. And a massive, great book of ready reckoners like that. I think it's more of a process, actually, and more of a thinking through process. And I think commissioners, elected representatives, local politicians in particular, working together with their communities and trying to come up with what are the social values we really value in this area? What are the things that in this community would be really valuable? And then, if you can go through that process, then when you do come to your commissioning for the nuts and bolts of what you're ordering, are the things that are over and above that are going to be valuable to you. For example, local jobs. For example, local apprenticeships. For example, community engagement, or the number of volunteers that you're getting into operation. I mean, I've been talking with a big, very large metropolitan council, and they're trying to get to the bottom of how they're going to tackle some very deprived areas that have been constantly deprived areas, not for a few years, but for decades. And all sorts of things have been tried, big regeneration programs have been tried. And then they thought, well, if we get some big employers in the area and we have the transport links, then that will help solve the problem. And that didn't seem to shift it either. And what they're concentrating on now is micro-enterprise. And what they say to me is, I don't care whether it's private enterprise, social enterprise, or a charity. What we want is, first of all, that local people are engaged, they're not watching daytime TV, they're getting involved in this. And secondly, that the money stays in the area. That's what the micro-enterprise brings. And that is what they're pinning their hopes on, to try and revive some of the most difficult areas. And then I want to just make two other points. One is, I want to illustrate, actually, with an example, and Elizabeth Young's in the back of the room, from an organisation I know called Homestar. And what they do, if you don't know Homestar, is they have referred parents who are having difficulties with their children, often young children, and they will find a volunteer parent, sometimes somebody who's been through the same process before, to go and work with the person, have a cup of tea, but also talk through the whole range of issues that they have. And it's a very successful programme. And some of the people can be reached who actually, if you were from the authorities, if you had a uniform on of some type, you're not going to get the same cooperation as somebody who's coming along as a peer and friend. Maybe their kids go to the same school as your kids, or the same nursery, or they live on the same estate. So you can meet some of the people who would be very hard to reach otherwise. And the amazing thing, I'm not going to give you the figures here, but if you look at how much that costs, it costs a very small amount compared with trying to get full-time employees in there all the time, and it costs a very little amount compared with the cost of an unsuccessful, allowing that person to get into trouble, allowing their child to be taken into care, and all of the enormous cost that would have. So I just wanted to say that yes, it's cost effective, but actually the benefits, the additional benefits and social value are enormous from that sort of project. And the final thing I just want to say is this. The big society is, I think, an idea which actually chimed with the British people. I was at the Labour Party, we're a non-party political organisation, I was at the Labour Party conference with you, the ResPublica event last week, and I said to people I thought they were wrong to attack the big society as an idea, because I think it chimed, people know about it, and it chimes with people's idea of communities coming together to help each other. But I think it did lose some of its tarnish, just lose some of its shine, rather, because people started to get a bit confused about it, or they saw things which seemed to be contradictory about it. And I think the challenge to the government is to renew that trust that people have, to explain what it's about, and to try and show in practice that it can have benefits, and that's the thing that will bring people most enthusiasm towards it. And one aspect of it, Ed Miliband last week seemed to kind of be affected by the vapours of Benjamin Disraeli from the nearby remains of the Free Trade Hall, as you may have noticed. And I wondered if we here could perhaps imbibe the spirit a little of Joseph Chamberlain, who made great strides forward in Conservative, but not least in stressing the importance of local government. And I think I go back to John Major a bit, really, and for those observers of European matters, subsidiarity. But the idea of that and the idea of localism is a really good one, which is that you should take decisions at the most appropriate, the lowest, most local level appropriate for that decision. Try to take your decisions at the most local level possible. And I think that's what we've got to do to make this work and to make the big society work. Because my slogan at the moment is that the big society will only work if the local society works, which I think if you think about it is bound to be true. So thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And I think localism will be absolutely key, because social value is just not going to mean the same to different communities. But more about that in the discussion. Can I pass now over to Barry Hughes? Thank you very much.
First, I'd just like to say it's a real honour to be able to share the platform with people like Nick and Chris, who are making changes at the top of the pyramid. I wanted to give you the view sort of from the other end, really, of what it's like for us and the things that we've been trying to do to make a practical difference on the ground through the way that we deliver some of our services. My own background is not in housing, Selwood Housing Association, but I used to work in newspapers and was finance director of the Evening Standard and the Metro, so I think that has brought some different ideas in, and hopefully we're not as restricted by some of the risk aversion that's been talked about that does affect the whole of the public sector. And we've been able to show that there is a different approach that you can take, and despite what the lawyers might say, it is still legal and possible to deliver a different approach. Obviously Selwood Housing, as a housing association, delivers the bricks and mortar of housing, but we're also very integrated into our local communities, and we're very keen to be able to help people to help themselves, to get themselves off the benefits treadmill and into work. And we wanted to find a way to use our procurement to deliver those aims, as well as the bricks and mortar side of the business. What we found was we started off thinking, this is 2 or 3 years ago, is there a way that we could raise money for a charitable fund through our procurement by asking our suppliers to make an additional donation into there. As we started to talk it through with our suppliers and with the lawyers, we realised that that really wasn't the most effective way to do it. There was a lot of bureaucracy there. We got a positive response from the suppliers because they wanted to do things, but they were finding that bureaucracy was limiting what they wanted to do as well. So we moved on from the idea of a straightforward donation of cash, and we realised that actually our suppliers have skills, knowledge, other assets that they want to use for the benefit of the community. They all have corporate social responsibilities, they're part of that local community as well, and they want to make a difference. It's finding a mechanism that allowed them to do that. So what we ended up bringing forward was what we call our Silver Clause. Silver is the brand that we have for all our social enterprise work, and the Silver Clause sits within our contracts. So we do our normal procurement, it's EU procurement where it's necessary, we fall under those rules, but as part of the procurement, the contractor is able to score some points for offering things like apprenticeships or community labour days, training and development for our tenants to help them get into work, a whole range of options, and also anything else that they want to come up with themselves from understanding their own businesses. And that was scored in points in the tender. It's not the only thing. Obviously price still matters and quality still matters, so it's only an element of it, and if somebody wants to ignore it completely, they can still do that. It's proportionate to the whole contract that's being let, but we have found that people haven't wanted to ignore it. They've been really keen on putting things forward to us, and what's really good for us is a lot of it is a really good fit, because our contractors are often in plumbing, carpentry, electrical work, all those kind of things, and that's exactly what a lot of our tenants want to train to do to get themselves back into work. So there's a really good fit with the skills that our contractors have and the things that our tenants are looking for. To give you a couple of examples, one on a roofing contract that we let. The roofing contractor had actually been looking for an apprentice. They wanted to set up an apprenticeship within their business. They hadn't been able to do it because of the bureaucracy involved, form filling, they didn't know where to start. And actually when we looked into it, there wasn't anywhere in the southwest of England, anywhere, that somebody could go and do a roofing apprenticeship. None of the colleges offered the right courses. The nearest place was actually here in Birmingham. Somebody would have to travel up from Wiltshire to do a roofing apprenticeship. So that idea came about through the clause. It was one thing that the contractor wanted to put forward. We were able to work with them and the local college, and starting shortly we'll have a roofing course at our local college in Wiltshire, which will be a centre for roofing apprenticeships in the county to get people into that particular skill and trade. So that wouldn't have happened without having this as an element of the procurement, because we would never have realised that the contractor wanted it, and they would never have realised that we were able to help them deliver it. Another interesting example was one of our painting contractors. They have lots of surplus paint left over, and actually for them that's a real pain. It's a cost. They have to dispose of it and abide by all the appropriate environmental regulations when they do that. So they were left with this stock, and actually now we've made that connection there, and they donate it to our community groups if they want it, and they're able to use it to spruce up a local community centre. We had a group that did a play area on one of our estates, used the paint for that, and that got kids out from the estate and adults. I could be out there. I think more paint ended up on the kids and fences, but they did repaint their play area. So all these things have happened because of putting this in there. We've had 20 odd apprenticeships come out of it as well, so there's an awful lot of other stuff going on the back of putting a simple thing in there. So if it's so straightforward, then why isn't everybody doing it? And I think we've touched on some of that already with the risk that people fear, and they fear the change and they're not quite sure whether they're able to do it. Another thing that comes up is the price. Certainly our finance director first was saying, well, we'll just pay for this, they'll just add the cost onto the contract, but we haven't found that at all. Our prices haven't gone up, in fact they've come down in some cases, but we've still got the social benefit out of it as well. And I think that's because it's something the contractors want to do. It ticks the corporate social responsibility box for them and has other benefits as well, so why would they charge us for something that's good for them? So we haven't seen an uplift in price, and we've addressed the fear side of it as well. We've pushed on and done it. Nobody's challenged it. We've even done a tender of legal services. None of the lawyers challenged it or queried or said that we were doing anything wrong. All but one of them put in offers of pro bono work or use of their facilities and offices and these kind of things, that they were happy to go along with it. So that, they didn't think it was anything inappropriate. So there's no reason really why people shouldn't be able to do this, put these kind of things into their contracts and start to make a difference in the local communities that they work in. And obviously the Act will make that a lot easier for everybody, and hopefully more people will start to look at doing this kind of work. So that's just a very quick couple of examples of the things we're able to do and have been able to do to make a difference. As I say, you do have to keep it relevant to the work that we do. As we're a social business, this kind of work is directly relevant to what we do, and we keep it proportionate to the overall contract. We can't lose sight of still getting the value on the other elements, but it has been a really simple and effective way of drawing in new resources and finding out things from our contractors that they wanted help doing anyway. So hopefully that's given you an insight into the work that Selwood Housing is doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. And now we have just a few couple of minutes really for any of the panelists to respond to what each other have said. If you would like to, anyone? Okay, we'll open it up to questions. So I'll take them in groups of 3. Can I have Titus, then Alex, and Fina?
Thank you. Titus Alexander, People Can. We rely a lot as a charity on commissioned work, which I'm really glad you're setting up a commissioning academy because it's long overdue. Practice is very uneven. And there's some great commissioning, but sometimes people put a huge amount of work on something and then the commission is just withdrawn. And I'd like to ask whether you are considering or working on a number of points, one of which is bringing in service users to help and work with commissioners on designing their commission. In other words, we've done work on field research, and I think it'd be incredibly valuable if they are involved with commissioners at a very early stage and to design what kind of services are going to be offered. The second one is to understand where grant funding and other forms of funding or mixed funding is appropriate, because commissioners often think that the only way of funding something is to commission it, and legally the grant funding is still an option. And the third is about the longer term relationship funding, because I think culture change, which Chris was talking about, comes as a result of system change. And one of the problems with commissions is that you specify in detail and then that goes on, whereas in fact circumstances change, and if you have a longer term relationship you can negotiate that, and so it's something to think about. And the final thing around social value is about independent support for measuring impact and looking at, because very often if organisations do evaluation themselves, they've got a vested interest in a good result, and it's very difficult to get independent support and learning from, if you like, a critical friend, feedback to the service provider on what's working and what's not working, so that they're not having, in a way, in the commissioning process, to a certain extent, you have to bluff. You want to support people to really learn what works.
It's Alex Fox from Shared Lives Plus. We're a not very well-known form of social care in which families share their family and community life with people who need support. And we are growing, and in order to try Shared Lives. In order to speed up that growth, we are working with social finance to try and accelerate the growth based on the savings that are realised through this form of support. To sort of pick up on the previous speaker's point, we have a grant now to do the exploring and modelling, and what it's really bringing up for us is the weakness, which isn't just about us, it's about social care in general, around outcome measuring. We need outcome-based contracts, but actually there isn't a standardised way of measuring the outcomes across social care. If we get as far as getting a social impact bond together, we're going to have to put some of that money aside, I think, into a decent, independent outcome measuring tool, and I can see this happening again and again. What we really need is some shared sense of some shared tools, or at least some shared standards tools by which we should all be measuring the outcomes, because at the end of the day we want to expand shared lives, but we actually want to do so in a way that proves that it's better than everybody else's form of social care, and we can only do that if we're all measuring the same things in the same way.
Hi, thanks. I'm Sukhvinder Kaur Stubbs. I'm Chair of Volunteering England. So, Joe, thank you for the plug. My experience is more. My experience of commissioning is in the social care sector as well. And what I wanted to do was just make the distinction between social value and social values. And I think that one of the things that needs to happen is that our values, the social values, need to be translated into a set of quality indicators to help quantify, or to help make more tangible what it is that we want to see happen as a result of these values. Now, to some extent, I think that the NHS with the acute care has done some of this, and maybe what we have to do is just work a little bit harder at identifying what are the quality indicators that are required in any service and then look at those alongside the financial and the community and the other outputs as well.
Thank you very much. Can we start at this side of the panel and then move along in terms of responses? Chris unfortunately has to leave at 6, so we do have to push in his responses before then.
Okay, I just reflect this, that nobody said so and I didn't, but actually there are big challenges from all of this for the volunteering community sector itself. So we've got to be better at showing impacts, we've got to be better at measuring things, but I do think that to some extent we need help with that as well. And I think a smaller organisation, we've been involved in the Early Intervention Foundation, and we're trying to say how can you apply that, the same goes for social impact bonds, social finance, how can you apply it to smaller organisations, or organisations that don't know what they can't guarantee what their income is going to be in 5, 10, 20 years time. So I'd love to do that, and I think those are all good things, but we need to think carefully how we can make that happen. And just on involving service users, if I can, I was just today with some of our members, and in Oxfordshire and in Birmingham, both of those areas are working with the local community organisations to go aside and say the Social Value Act is coming along, can we get service users involved in this, not just for a specific service, but how we're going to apply the Social Value Act in total. So I think that's a good tip.
Thank you. Regarding service users, I think that is a fundamental part of the Act, and the consultation process should be bringing in the communities that will actually be experiencing whatever is being procured. I think you have a very good point in terms of a longer term relationship. Unless organisations can plan for the future and have a greater investment, long term investment for themselves in the future, I think it is unlikely that people will be so excited about putting the energy and effort into winning these contracts in the first place. I think a couple of the other speakers have talked about measures, perhaps in my view, an over-prescriptive way. I think there should be a lot more flexibility in how different organisations, different groups, different communities will measure things which are more relevant to how their own users and our own communities actually see what are the merits of an outcome and how something actually leads an organisation.
And Titus, your point on service users is fundamental. And comes really to the basic point around the distinction between commissioning and procurement, because they're different things. Procurement is a process to buy something as efficiently as possible. But commissioning is the process whereby you get a deep understanding of what is actually needed. And then you go about shaping the market of supply that gives you the best possible chance of meeting that need. And you use the word patchy. I probably use a stronger word across the system. We're just inconsistent in terms of the quality and our actually understanding really of what the role of commissioning genuinely is. And I'll come back to my first point. That's not really surprising. Lots of new people doing this role. But if you talk to Victor Adewale, or they're absolutely passionate about the need to get a really deep understanding across the political system about what fundamentally the role of commissioning is, and if the starting point is first responsibility to get a deep understanding of what is actually needed, then the involvement of service users in that log is obviously fundamental and goes way beyond just traditional measures of consultation, which certainly in my constituency are entirely synonymous with sham. So a whole step change required in that, and Chris's Act does help in that in terms of sending a strong signal. The point you made about grants is an important one, and Joe alluded to it. I am concerned that in to try and do a better job in terms of buying on behalf of the taxpayer, which is right and proper, to be more robust in getting outcomes, there's a stampede away from grants. I think that I've always said I think there is a fundamental role for grants, and a tremendous potential to make grant making more intelligent. In terms of, I know Steve and I talked, Bob, who's gracious with his presence at the back, have talked about it. But of course, the sector would much prefer just to have a system based on grants and the good old days when, free money with very little strings attached to it. Of course, that. but we're having just gone through. I mean, I've gone through this personally, through as being effectively, the minister responsible for delivering the National Citizen Service, where we, the first years we've done it through a grant process, increasingly large grants, and it was genuinely frustrated as the buyer of the service there, that actually once you gave the grant, you lost some control, and you lost a lot of ability to actually correct underperformance, and therefore I think we have to understand that people spending taxpayers' money are increasingly going to need to feel that they've got more levers and they've got more control. But intelligent commissioners should recognise that you can achieve a lot of, you may be, in certain situations, be able to achieve a lot of what you want to achieve through intelligent grant-making process rather than going through some overwrought commissioning and contracting process. And I think that signal is important. And my third point is just around the measurement point, which Alex picked up. Yes, I completely buy that analysis, Alex. And what I'm trying to do is, because, and Steve and I talked about it at breakfast this morning, I think it is inevitable. Money is going to be more demanding in terms of the need to measure value and to measure social value. Commissioners, not least as a result of Chris's bill, are going to be more curious about this and will want better evidence. What we've got to do in that process is help the sector and work with funders to build some consensus around what is worth measuring and how it is measured in the most cost-effective and affordable way. And we are doing that in a very gritty, grainy, painstaking way in partnership with New Philanthropy Capital and Big Society Capital and other interested parties on a sub-sector by sector basis, really actually just getting into the detail. But to do that, what's worth measuring and what's the most cost-effective way of measuring so that it's affordable for everybody. It is an inevitable part of the future, and we have to help the sector prepare for it.
Thank you very much.
I just want to pick up on a couple of those points. The service user involvement point, I would completely agree with that. It's something that we do. We get our tenants involved when we're procuring any of our contracts. I think it does make a huge difference to the outcomes that we get. And on the measurement point, I obviously agree it needs to be there, but we share some of the concerns that have already been said, that we need to be really careful that it doesn't balloon into this great bureaucracy of itself. You see some of the social return on investment models that are out there, and they become horrendously complicated, and no small organisation is ever going to be able to survive when they have to produce a massive reports to justify what they're doing. So we need to be really careful that we maintain the balance with that measurement and we don't go too far. I think back to when we used to have to produce lists of non-cashable gains so we could spend more money and then say we'd actually save money because some other thing had gone up. I mean, it was complete nonsense and took up a load of time and resources. So the measurement needs to be kept simple and clear for everybody to understand. And as Chris said, we've done it at a local level and find a way that's appropriate for everyone.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chris, very much for joining us on the panel. I'll take another round of questions, the group of three again. The gentleman at the front, the gentleman over here, and the lady just here, please.
Nick Partridge, the Terence Higgins Trust, the HIV and Sexual Health charity. I just really want to highlight for the panel a major opportunity that is on the horizon to really test out the Social Value Act, and that's the transfer of public health from the NHS to local government. And within that, it's going to provide local councillors, local communities, real opportunities to engage in improving their own health. Often that's amongst the most deprived wards of any local government area. And I would be really keen to ensure, and I'm sure, Nick, you've got an eye on this, that the Commissioning Academy really talks to local authority commissioners and gears them up in the way that you were describing to both ensure there's much greater innovation in public health. It needs that. There is real opportunity to have much greater public engagement in improving their own health, be that in sexual health, in drug treatment services, in tackling obesity. So I think there is a real challenge and opportunity for local government to test out how it can best deliver greater social value through its commissioning of public health when it receives that on the 1st of April?
Great question.
Hi, I'm Arlodia from the Small Business Consultancy. I'd like to think that we're an organisation that's been championing innovation. We've recently, as a small organisation, socially franchised. We recently agreed our franchise in Nottingham to a college. We basically work with recovering drug addicts, ex-offenders, people from furthest removed from the labour market, help them set up their own businesses to recover from whatever they're recovering from. Now, we've got some really interesting experience both now locally in London and nationally around working with drug and alcohol commissioners. My question really here is what is the government going to do to encourage more joined up commissioning to reduce duplication? What are you going to do to encourage more joined up commissioning? Because there are a lot more stakeholders than just the commissioners. And the other side of the question is that actually commissioners are not the only people that commission. There are other people that influence commissioning decisions, like strategic managers within local authorities, directors. What are their roles within your new commissioning academy, and what's the government going to do to kind of help them procure better decisions? And lastly, I'd like you all to define what you mean by social value.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting talk. It's Catherine Deakin from Help the Hospices here. Very timely fringe during what we're celebrating our Hospice Care Week, celebrating the achievements of over 200 hospices across the UK, including the social value they provide through volunteering and employment opportunities alongside the care they provide for over 300,000 people across the UK. Just had a quick question for you. In terms of the contribution of hospices, they invest over 500 million financially in care across the UK, and I was just wondering, in terms of your views on recognising the voluntary sector as a co-commissioner of care alongside both financial and social value, and how you think, I'm probably stealing Joe's question here, how you can enable the voluntary sector to make the most of the Act.
Thank you very much. Can we go in reverse order this time? So, Barry, are you happy to start?
Yeah. Just to pick up really on, I think the transfer of public health to local authorities, and also linking that to the other people that do the commissioning, and I think both of those need to be driven by the councillors to be able to get hold of the officers and say, you know, this is what we want to do. You must change the way that you operate. Don't allow them to continue in the same safe way that they've operated before, because that's what people will naturally do if they're allowed to do that. It's always easier to carry on in the way you've always behaved, and if the pressure doesn't come on from those elected representatives to push that change through, then I don't think it will happen, because there'll be a few pockets of innovation, but most people will stick with what they know. So I think it's really down to the councillors to make sure that within those local authorities the changes that they want to see are being made. I think they were the ones I wanted to pick up on.
I think the public health. Yeah, you're right. Public health is a huge opportunity, and we must make sure we get this right. And I think it is time to get serious about it. Anyone looking at the future of the National Health Service and the sums of money that are likely to be involved in it, no, we've got to spend more effort in trying to keep people healthier out of hospital. Again, a little local illustration of the opportunity. I was quite struck by it. The leader of Hillingdon Council is an accountant and a brilliant leader of a council, but not someone who's I would normally associate with this agenda. But he had come up to me. He said, "Nick, we're taking control of public health. We're going to be doing a lot more with our local voluntary sector." And that was just his first reaction. There's a very big opportunity here, and I'm sure that the Commissioning Academy will have some role to play. We've started small, and it's going slower than I would like. It's all the frustrations that the minister have, but you've got to get it right. But we will be inviting teams in, and coming back to the point made before, leadership. because if you talk to commissioners who are trying to do new things, they can't do it without the political buy-in. They can't do it without, you know, that person around the cabinet table and now saying, no, we should be doing this. And therefore, it's always, when you're trying to do something new, it's always about leadership. And that's why, you know, in the past, commissioning training process has been a bit of a sheep-dig exercises with you know, sort of mid-level people going through it. We want leadership. We want the teams and their leadership to be part of a process designed to try and help them be as intelligent as possible in their commissioning process. So it is a different approach. A definition of social value. Very good point. I'm actually going to duck it because I'm I'm going to. It's going to be a fundamental part of the guidance that we put out to commissioners as a result of as part of this process of making sure we implement this act properly. And I don't want to define it in a way that is something to be completely different from the one we do officially. But your point is a very important one. You can't just blithering on about something called social value without actually helping people understand what you really mean, and preferably illustrating it by examples of what actually you can do. If you can. No, exactly. No, that absolutely. So our job and our responsibility is to really help make this real and relevant to them in language that is clearly understood. So your point is entirely valuable, even if I choose to duck the question.
Just a quick kind of plug of one of ResPublica's reports that's due to come out in a few weeks, called Acting on Localism, Putting the Social into the Local Through Housing Associations. We argue there, and particularly in one of the chapters, that housing associations can actually be this big driver of working with communities to actually identify with them what social value actually means and what they actually value in their local area. And I think we would say that is incredibly important when pushing forward this agenda. But finally, to Joe.
Okay, well, just pick up a couple of points. I'm short, but the challenge to define social value. I won't give you the exact words, but it's something like it's bringing something over and above what's specified in the contract in terms of goods and services, which is valuable to the local community. And I think it's important to have a definition which can be applied slightly differently in different places, because localism has got to mean diversity. And I think also that, as I said before, if you can identify as a community what things you are really top of your agenda in terms of social value, then that will make it a much simpler process than if you try and look through 150 different things that might be applied. So that's on that one. And the specific question that you said to me and Steve Bob, since Steve's not got the mic, I'll reply on behalf of us both. I hope it's something you agree with, Steve. I think that for us it means engaging at an early stage. And a big part of what our members do, Council of Voluntary Service and so on, is about engagement. So they're very involved in developing local health watch. We've not mentioned the police and crime commissioners. They're commissioners that are coming in. They're saying they're going to use voluntary organisations and volunteers a lot more. So just making sure the role that we have in engaging the wider community is really important. Secondly, we do need intelligent commissioning. I think that's a fantastic phrase that Nick used. That's exactly what we need. But we've got to be intelligent providers, if you like, whatever the opposite of commissioners are. So we've got to be intelligent as well. We've got to prove our worth, and we've got to work with them in a sensible way to make it all happen. And I think among ourselves, we've got to try and have economies of scale. We've got to try and work with each other, and that may mean in certain circumstances, for example, coming together in consortia to make ourselves a viable critical mass, if you like, or range of expertise that's going to be valuable to those commissioners. So there are a few things that I think we should think about.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Joe. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But please do check out our website for our Fringe magazine, the Acting on Localism report that's due to be released in a few weeks. And Chris White MP will be writing a short paper for us, which we will be publishing in the next couple of months as well. So please do look out for that. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much to our panel.